It really happened. This story is based on newspaper accounts of the shootout at War Creek. The story's titled, All-Day Meeting and Bodies on the Ground. All-day meeting and bodies on the ground. I've got 6 girls, and each one of them has a brother. This was the normal response when someone asked my grandfather about his family. Bess, Mary, Callie, Faye, Elsie, and Phyllis were the girls. Raymond, Elmo, Eugene, Gaither, Carl, and Jesse were the girls' brothers. Those were my aunts and uncles, except for Mary, who was my mother. Poppy, as my grandfather was called by everyone in the family, owned a small farm in Wide Creek, Kentucky. The house had no plumbing or central heat. There was electricity, with a small single light bulb hanging from the ceiling in each room. The lights were turned on by a pull string. The house had 2 bedrooms, a front room, a dining room, and a kitchen on the main floor. There was an upstairs which was divided into 2 rooms with about 3 double beds in each. There was a wood-burning potbelly stove in the front room and a wood-burning cook stove in the kitchen at the rear. A path led north out the kitchen door to an outhouse that seemed to be a half-mile away in the middle of the winter. White Creek is located in the northwest corner of Breathitt County. The only access to White Creek is from the south because it sits in a horseshoe bend of the Kentucky River to the north. The west property line of Poppy's farm was the county line with Lee County to the west. Across the river to the north is Wolfe County. In 1945, Mary married Ova Amburgey, who was from Wolfe County just across the river. Poppy gave, or maybe sold them, a small part of ground on the south edge of his farm. They built a small house, but never lived in it because of the dream of a good job in Ohio, and that drew them north instead. So I was born in Dayton, Ohio, not Wide Creek. But growing up, we made a lot of trips down home, as Mom would say. Every year in the late 1950s and early 1960s, I remember going down home on Decoration Day. Most people call it Memorial Day. But for my family, it meant visits to the graveyards of past relatives to put flowers on the graves. Another activity of Decoration Day was the all-day meeting and dinner on the ground at the small country churches in the area. The events at one of these church meetings near Wide Creek turned into tragedy and is why I wrote this story. About 3 miles east of Wide Creek, in another holler called War Creek. In 1932, the church at War Creek was holding an all-day meeting with dinner on the ground. These meetings consisted of gatherings in the morning, usually around 10, listening to 2 or 3 preachers, having lunch, and then more preaching in the afternoon. The preaching by these country preachers was a mix of shouting and singing with panting, gasping, and a lot of sweating as they made their points about heaven and hell and how to make the right decisions. In today's terms, It could be described as gospel rap. Around noon, they would break for lunch. Lunch consisted of all things brought in picnic baskets and covered bowls by the various families. The lunch was laid out on 2 2x6s across sawhorses along the outside wall of the church house. The people would fill their plates with fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and corn on the cob, and sit on the ground around the yard to eat. About 100 people filed out of the 80 or 90 seat church in War Creek for lunch on May 29th in 1932. The morning services went well with 3 preachers, but no one was saved. They each filled their plates from the long table of food, got a glass of iced tea, and found a place to sit and eat. Most sat with their family on spread-out blankets or around the many wagons parked around the church with mules still harnessed and waiting to go home. It was a time of relaxing and enjoying a good meal. But not everyone was in church that morning. 4 guys who had come with their families had slipped out of the service and gone up into the woods to drink. They had 2 mason jars of local moonshine. One of the guys was Lowell Cundiff, a young buck in his early 20s. Lowell was known around those parts for being a loose cannon. He often got into fights and other mischief. He had had several run-ins with the law, mostly when he had been drinking. The quart jars of White Lightning were empty as the last of the church folks were filling their plates. The drinkers decided it was time to eat, so they came back out of the woods. Lowell Cundiff was more than a little drunk. The church folks saw the opportunity to save a soul. A couple of the preachers asked Lowell to talk with them. Lowell was not interested in their religion and proceeded to tell them so in no uncertain language. Meanwhile, on the other side of the church house, Breathitt County Sheriff Deputy Morgan Pelfrey was working on an ear of corn. Morgan was 40 years old and had been with the Sheriff's Department since getting out of the Army after World War I. He was well respected in the department and in the county. He was known for his even-tempered, calm demeanor. He was sitting on the ground with his back against the church, enjoying his lunch with his family. Nearby were the families of one of his brothers and a sister. Morgan's oldest daughter came over to where he was sitting. She had just gone around the church to refill her iced tea glass. "Daddy, there's trouble over by the table. I think there may about to be a fight." Reluctantly, Morgan put down his ear of perfectly buttered, perfectly salted sweet corn and got up to go see what was going on. Having overheard what his niece had said, Morgan's brother Wiley, age 32, got up as well. The 2 walked around the church. Just as Deputy Pelfrey came around the corner of the building, he heard shouting and saw Lowell Cundiff push one of the preachers down to the ground. Morgan grabbed Cundiff by the straps of his overalls and pulled him backwards toward the dirt road that ran in front of the church. "I think it's time you go home and sober up," Morgan told Lowell. Lowell's father, W.D. Dan Cundiff, stepped in to the aid of his son. Dan Cundiff was a big man, both in stature and in influence in Breathitt County. He worked for the L&N Railroad as its shop foreman in their Jackson yard. He was used to people doing what he said and even fearing him. He charged at Morgan. Morgan raised his left elbow as Dan lunged catching him under the chin and knocking him to the ground. Dan Cundiff hit the ground with a thud and flat on his back. Morgan continued to drag Lowell toward the road. Former Deputy Sheriff Jerry Turner and his friend Wiley Bryant ran over to give Morgan a hand as Dan was rolling over to get up. Turner and Bryant grabbed Lowell as Morgan shifted his attention to Dan. Lowell Cundiff was now in a rage. He kicked Bryant and struck Turner with his fist. As Lowell's dad came up off the ground, he pulled a revolver from his pocket and pointed it at Morgan. Morgan drew and fired a shot, striking Cundiff in the left shoulder and knocking him back to the ground. As he hit the ground, Cundiff fired 3 times. 2 bullets struck Morgan, and 1 hit Turner. Morgan's brother Wiley grabbed his brother's gun and fired several bullets, killing Dan Cundiff. When the dust had settled, former Deputy Sheriff Jerry Turner was wounded, and Deputy Sheriff Morgan Pelfrey was dead. Wiley Pelfrey and Wiley Bryant were arrested and charged with the murder of W.D. Cundiff. They were taken to the Breathitt County Jail in Jackson. It wasn't long until everyone in Breathitt County knew all the details of the events at the War Creek all-day meeting. The Cundiff family was well known in Jackson, as was Deputy Morgan Pelfrey. The case was of great interest, and as the trial began, the courthouse was packed to capacity and then some. Therefore, the attorney for the defendants requested and was granted a change of venue for the trial. The murder trial for Wiley Pelfrey and Wiley Bryant was moved to the Lee County Courthouse in Beattyville, Kentucky. Bryant had pled not guilty since he had not fired a shot and was only attempting to assist his friends in the scuffle. Pelfrey had claimed he acted in self-defense in the shooting of Dan Cundiff. At the end of the day, on March 23, 1933, the Commonwealth of Kentucky concluded its case and gave it to the jury, composed of farmers and Beattyville merchants. The next morning, the jury returned for deliberations. After an hour and a half, they acquitted Wiley Bryant and found Wiley Pelfrey guilty of second-degree manslaughter. Pelfrey was sentenced to 21 years. Upon hearing the verdict, Governor Ruby Lofton issued a full and complete pardon for Wiley Pelfrey. The reason given was that he acted in defense of a law enforcement officer. So Poppy was released to go back to Wide Creek and continue raising his family. Yes, Wiley Pelfrey was my grandfather. He died on July 25th, 1970, at the age of 70.